Okay, so what we learned the other day is that if you have numbers in here, your graph moves to the left and to the right, it moves up and down, and it either gets narrower or wider and opens up or opens down, depending on what numbers you have for A, P, and Q. So if we have the equation in this form, we can graph it really easily. Now, here we have a graph. So sometimes we'll be given a graph, and we're going to have to try and find the equation. Notice in this graph, the key point, the vertex, we have gone over 4 to the right, and then down 2. So our vertex, this point right here, and you got to be careful with the scale, our vertex is 4, negative 2. So it's been moved 4 to the right. How does that 4 to the right show up in our equation? That happened with something inside the brackets. If I wanted it to go 4 to the right, would it be plus 4 or minus 4? Minus 4. And if I wanted it to go 2 down, would it be plus 2 or minus 2 at the end? Minus 2. So we've almost come up with an equation just by knowing the vertex. The only thing left for us to do is to find out if this graph, is it narrower than normal? Is it wider than normal? How can we find that out? And almost every time that you get a question like this, they're going to indicate, just like they've done right here and right here, they're going to indicate some other points on the graph. Because depending what point you pick, it might be a little bit off just because you're trying to guess exactly where does that point go. But they gave us these 2 points. If I look here, this one's at 6, negative 14 because I'm going by 2's. Whoa. And this one is at 2, negative 14. Now, anytime they give you an additional point, something to know about equations. This equation that we're trying to make is a graph that will represent every single point that could be on that parabola. So if a point is on that parabola, it will make this equation true. If you pick a point like the origin 0, 0 that's not on that parabola, if you plug 0 in for x and 0 in for y, you should get something that's not true, like 5 equals 10. But every point that is on that parabola should make this equation true. Now, if we take one of these points, let's say we take 2, negative 14, that means when x is 2, y has to be negative 14. So if I go to my equation, I say, well, when x is 2, y has to be negative 14. I can plug those values in for x and y. Look at my equation now. What's the only thing we don't know? A. And if there's only one thing we don't know in an equation, we can use our algebra, combine like terms, do order of operations to get that A by itself. So right now I have negative 14 here. A times by 2 minus 4 will be negative 2. And then negative 2 squared will be positive 4. If I want to combine these like terms, I can add 2 to both sides. And I'll get negative 12. Now A times 4 is the same as 4 times A. And divide both sides by 4. And I find out that A is equal to negative 3. So whenever they ask you to determine an equation, you need to find a value for A, a value for P, and a value for Q. The x and the y will still be part of the equation because those are your variables that change. So now we can rewrite our equation. Our final equation is going to be y equals, we figured out A is negative 3. We figured out that P had to be 4 because it was 4 to the right, and Q had to be negative 2. And now we have our equation of our parabola. You did this last year in grade 10 with y equals mx plus b. But you had to find something for m and something for b. And the same thing, you could often find your y-intercept or count your slope, but sometimes you had to plug in a value for x and y in order to find b or in order to find m. So the idea is very similar to what we did with lines, but with lines you just had to find your slope and your y-intercept to write the equation. Now you have to find an a value, a p value, and a q value, but p and q, you almost find them at the same time because that's your vertex. And then once you have your vertex, you can plug in another point to find your a value, and then once you've got your a value, you can write the entire equation. So questions that you can do for practice on this one. Are 3, 4, 5, and 7.